jingoistic in real, but there definitely are sentiments that always value ethnocentric considerations of Nepal and supremacy of Nepali culture, etc. We'll come into what Nepali culture is seen as in mainstream politics while we're discussing identity politics and Panchayat in a while. Then another feature that I think is of Nepali politics is that there is a massive inefficient service delivery to the people. There can be few things that can be said. For example, in the present, this could be a controversial opinion, but again, this is my opinion. So I welcome disagreements if there are any. I think the biggest example of inefficient service delivery to the people in the present is Nepal Communist Party that has communist idea within themselves do not cater to anything that Govinda Kesi has stated as demands. Govinda Kesi, who is a doctor, who asks for public health system, who asks for regulations of private sector, is seen as enemy by the ruling elites that are currently holding power within our system. Which shows, this is only a representative example. I think there has been these forms of disagreements in both sides of politics. For example, even Nepali Congress, which claims to be Socialist Party of Nepal, was responsible for inviting liberalization in the country, which probably is good for Nepal, I think, personally. But there is massive contradiction within things that these political parties claim to support and things that they actually do in terms of delivering service to people. So there definitely is inefficient service delivery. I think this can be put into very layman term in terms of lack of delivery of road services. For example, roads outside my house are not pieced. There is lack of other structural problems that we face, for example, education, barriers in healthcare, lack of public health insurance, and other things that we have seen politicians promise to our people but never been delivered. I think this is also an important feature of Nepali politics. So for example, if we're debating in anything about aid, etc., foreign aid or investment or MNCs, there can always be arguments that we can make about the nature of inefficient delivery, the nature of corruptions, and why benefits are never likely to trickle down to people in the ground as well. We can also nuance it by citing different Nepali examples too, which we'll come to after a while. I think the last feature of Nepali politics can be foreign interference. Again, this can be controversial, and I'm not sure about it myself as well. To what degree does foreign interference exist, especially in the modern times? But because of geostrategic location of Nepal, because Nepal lies between two huge giant nuclear superpowers who have interest within Nepali territory too, because both serve as a defense against one another to them, and especially in the current context where they are practically at war, I think foreign interference is something that exists within Nepali politics. But in the past, if we analyze different things, foreign interference has definitely existed. It has existed in, I don't know, in a very realistic sense too, in a sense that in 2007, if there are any non-Nepali people, then we're using Nepali dates, but I will also try to use the English dates for convenience. In 1951, when Nepal finally overthrew the Rana oligarchs and established Saha monarchy and democracy, we signed the deal in India, and India agreed to send their administrator and their military to ensure that there is security, and they also were fine with with them giving advices to Nepali politicians and administrator as to how to run the state, because India had been independent for 4 years back then. So I think there has been foreign interference, which has been good as well, I think, because some foreign interference has played well to us. For example, the agreement between the 7-party political alliance and the Maoists was also done in India by support of India, while India facilitated everything, etc. I think foreign interference in Nepal has existed in different forms. These can simply be said in a more politically correct term as foreign, facilitation, mediation between parties, etc. But they also have pushed their own self-interest while facilitating or mediating these important things that had happened in Nepali political history in the past. So I think these are the few features that I see of Nepali politics. If anyone has any thing to say, any disagreement, or or anything to add, you can do it via chat, I think. So 10 seconds for that. 10, 9. Okay, influence of US. I'll come to that in a moment, but I think there definitely is influence of US to a certain degree. US has had, US has, one of the biggest embassies that US has throughout the world in Nepal because of Nepal's geostrategic location. I think the influence of US exists because they want to counter China to a large degree. But in the past too, I think, I'm not entirely sure about this because I'm not an expert. I'm still a student. From what I know, US has has always wanted to show their presence within the region because of proximity that Nepal has with China, and because China has historically been seen as as an enemy of the state. Why and to what extent do you believe liberalization has been good in Nepal? I'll come to that in a moment, but I think the answer to that is quite simple because before 1990, we're almost bankrupt. IMF we requested IMF to bail us out, but IMF suggested certain structural adjustment programs, which made certain that Nepal did not go bankrupt. We also had environment for private investments, which have been doing good, especially in the present after the transition period was over. I think all of this laid good enough foundations for Nepal to have a private economy that I think is crucial for developing nations specifically to go out and develop and trickle down many benefits to people in the grassroots. And I think this has been done significantly well as well, because in the past Nepal did not have a huge amount of per capita income. Even now they don't have it, but I think now it's $1,100 per year. In the past it was around $100 per year, which is very, very low. So I think these forms of benefit have been achieved, even though they were not benefit that were experienced immediately. But I think over the course of time, making Nepali economy more open, inviting more foreign development foreign direct investments, and all other things have helped Nepal categorically. I think Nepal would have been worse off without all of these things that had happened post 1990. I will come to all of these questions at the very end of the session because there are other things to talk about as well. So I just talked about some features of Nepali politics. Now I'll then officially go into what this session is about. So yes, things we'll talk about in this session. Because the session is titled The Basics of Nepali Politics, we'll try to cover the basic of modern Nepali politics, which are developments post 1950. Because post 1950, the fight in Nepal, what movements have strived for post 1950 has been very, very common. Oftentimes, these have been quest to self-determination, quest to have constituent assembly, because the revolution of 1950 or 2007's revolution also wanted to establish constituent assembly, which didn't happen in the very beginning as well. So all of the modern changes post 1950 have very similar characteristics. Therefore, we'll discuss about major political developments post 1950. And I think many things that we discuss before 1950 aren't very relevant to the modern political structure of Nepal, but they're still relevant because of other factors such as identity, other factors such as such as people's ability to grow and other structural problems, etc. I think all of those are important considerations. But in terms of how Nepali politics is structured, I don't think many things prior to 1950 are very, very relevant to discuss, especially in this session. So we'll talk about major political developments post 1950. The things that we'll talk about are also in the bracket, so please mind that too. So second, we'll talk about political system of the present, post-federalism, how is Nepal structured, how are elections conducted, and other things of that sort. Then finally, we'll also discuss about Nepal's foreign policy and diplomacy. Before moving on, I think Imtiaz has a question, so I'll read that question and then move on. If political parties in Nepal hold nationalist idea as dominant force, oftentimes that is anti-India and anti-US, how Nepal deals with India currently after border dispute? Yeah, all right. So how does Nepal deal with India? I think, Nepal and India have very interesting relations, because I think politically Nepal and India have always been close, and we have historically been very close to India. But in Nepal, anti-India sentiments have always been political tool that politicians have utilized. But that has never materialized into politicians going full out against, full out anti-India when they are in power. So usually these nationalistic tools have been a tool to come into power rather than tool to go against India or against United States at large. So I think that answers first part of the question. But second part is, how does Nepal deal with India, or is dealing with India in the present? I think Nepal is pushing for, throughout Nepal has been pushing for different dialogues. Modi and KP Oli have had series of conversations from what I've read. So I think Nepal is trying to go through diplomatic route, but it is also true that Nepal-India relation is not as good as it used to be in the past, especially after the lockdown or blockade that India did after the earthquake of Nepal, where India, technically, not officially but unofficially initiated a trade embargo against Nepal, where Nepal did not get any economic goods and services coming from India. So post 2015, there has been within the political parties as well, and within the mainstream governments too, I think the relations has deteriorated. But after Modi was elected again, Nepal had seen some amount of positive attitude from India. But then again, India released their maps where they claimed the disputed territory within themselves, which has again deteriorated the relationship. But I think Nepal went in an aggressive path, in a sense that Nepal also released their own version of maps. And Nepal went in an aggressive, but I think there is an agreement between two governments to discuss about this border dispute that is happening in the present diplomatically after the COVID crisis is over. So that's the update about relationship between Nepal and India. If there are anything new that any one of us knows, then I would be very happy if people could share that too. So yes, I hope that answers your question. We'll move forward to major political developments post 1950 now. I'll first talk about the first democracy and fall of Rana. So before discussing about democracy, let's look at who Ranas were. Ranas were the descendant of Kunwar family, who helped the Shah family during their quest of unification, or their quest of, I don't know, I don't think unification would be an acceptable term, but their quest of making this modern Nepal that they've made. So Kunwar were an important family, but Ranas are descendant of Kunwars too. So they ruled for Nepal for 104 years. During that period, as I said before, Jangabahadur Rana orchestrated Kot massacre and then took power. And they restricted Shah monarchs who ruled Nepal at that period as ceremonial figurehead, where they had no power, but they still remained the kings. Ranas also made prime ministers and other government offices hereditary, in a sense that, Jangabahadur Rana would be the prime minister, the other prime minister would be Jangabahadur's son, and so on and so forth. But similarly, there was also a coup from some Sairs within the Ranas, who are also Ranas, who overtook the hereditary rule that Ranas were orchestrating, and orchestrated a coup and then established their own prime minister, hereditary prime ministerial rule by themselves. I think this can be, parallel to military rule of modern times. Rana rule can be parallel to the same, because they controlled military. They were the military heads of the country at that times, and they took over power and they ruled over Nepal. Rana rule ended with revolution of 1951. So in 1951, there was revolution that was led by Praja Parishad, if I'm not wrong, and Nepali Congress, and other independent civil society groups as well. And, after years of revolutions, we finally were able to overthrow Rana. I think Nepali Congress also had military wing. I'm not sure about their names. I think it's something Congress Mukti Morcha or something like that. but they also had military wing. And this was first revolution, and this was the first time that Nepal had seen democracy being established. I will not talk about Rana rule as much because I don't think it's very relevant to the session that we're going to have today, because I think Rana rule has a lot of flaws. Like some things that we can talk about is that during Rana regime, ordinary Nepali citizens did not have freedom of expression. They did not have education. They were not provided with any other public services, but they were taxed heavily, and they had to pay taxes to certain local officials that Rana had appointed by themselves. So there was massive power imbalance between the ruling elites and people close to Ranas and normal Nepali people. So this led to general frustration in the ground, and this led to eventual overthrowing of the Rana rule at 1951. So I'll not talk about it as much. I think those things aren't very relevant to this session, but after this, these things will be relevant. So yes, then again, after the democracy was established in 2007, first general election was held at 1959. Democracy was established at 1951. First general election was held in 1959. It took 8 years to conduct a general election. At that period, there were three different governments, interim governments. One of them was led by Matrika Prasad. One of them was led by, I forgot his name, Mohan Samsher Rana, I think. And another one was led by someone again from Nepali Congress Party, who also belongs to a Rana family, but was a prominent member of Nepali Congress Party themselves. So there were three governments after that. And finally, first election in history of Nepal was conducted in 1959 AD. In this election, Nepali Congress won overwhelming majority, winning 74 seats out of 109. And Biseswar Prasad Koirala became the first elected Prime Minister of Democratic Nepal. But there was, King Mahendra wasn't really satisfied with the way that the Democratic Nepal was operating. Also, just a clarification, between 1951 and 1959, King Tribhuvan, who used to be the monarch of Nepal, died, and King Mahendra, who was the son of King Tribhuvan, overtook the throne. And King Mahendra was oftentimes seen as reformist and was seen as progressive within the Nepali political mainstream. However, he had his own plans, and he wanted to institute a rule where he could practice his own authoritarian values as well. Again, this is highly controversial, and this has been debated a lot within Nepali political framework. But I think there is a general concession that Panchayat was authoritarian and did not provide enfranchisement to a degree that it is essential. It also restricted any forms of criticism to the, to the monarchs or the ruling elites that were in power as well. So that being said, democratic government was overthrown by King Mahendra in 1960. This is known as, oftentimes, the progressives in Nepal call this as a black day. But this probably was a matter of victory for a supporter of monarchs and Panchayat system, the aristocratic system of 5 people deciding everything. All right, that being said, moving on. Mahendra established Panchayat system. All right, would you say King Mahendra tried to nationalize and actively promote Khas-Aryan culture? I'll come to that in a moment. The next slide probably will deal with that. Okay, Mahendra then established Panchayat system. That's a partyless political system. Okay, so how did Mahendra get his power? I think officially through all governmental measures, through curriculums and through constitution that Mahendra had drafted, Mahendra consolidated his power by institutionalizing and invoking 3 pillars of Nepali identity. That was Hindu religion, Nepali language, and monarchy. These were the 3 pillars that Panchayat operated in, where they believed that these are the core to Nepali identity. They were promoted by narratives such as Ek Raja, Ek Bhesh, Ek Bhasha, which basically means one king, one dress, and one language. As I said in the very beginning of this presentation, Nepal is really diverse. Nepal has very different issues in different parts of Nepal geographically, but Nepal also has different issues in different cultures. There are different grievances that many people of different culture come from. But Panchayat was adamant on creating a singular national identity, which would be represented by the three pillars that I just mentioned. And this was promoted throughout through state propagandas, through state-led media, through education, and everything of that sort. I'll also talk about Citizenship Act in a moment, which gave rise to, or which at least bred seeds for Madhes movement and other identity-based movement that Nepal had seen in recent times too. So this was one of the features of Panchayat, and this is something that is largely criticized in Nepali academia, but there are also strong supporters of, at least even if they do not support monarchy, they are strong supporters of creating a singular national identity or singular nationalism in Nepal. But there are also vocal opposition, especially in modern times, led by Baburam Bhattarai, who want to argue for multinationalism within Nepal, where they argue that Nepal, we cannot create a singular nationalism in Nepal too. So this is also an important debate to keep in mind. So I think this slide will deal with a concern that Amisa had. Has Panchayat impacted modern politics of Nepal? I think firstly, this is my opinion again, I think there is a strong fascination with authoritarianism in Nepal. I think many political parties flirt with authoritarianism a lot of times. We've seen people like KP Oli or even people like Sher Bahadur Deva not taking criticisms that are directed towards them, be it from the general public or be it from within the parties. I think this is generally the impact of the kind of schooling that they had and the time frame where they started politics. Because the time where they started politics, political parties were banned, there were no civil discourses, there were no debates, and academia was largely state-led propaganda. So in those periods of time, the only opposition to the state would be really radical, aggressive approach against the state, where many political parties and the leaders that I mentioned before also took part in violent protests, also took part in joining in underground political rebel forces who led some revolutions. I'm not sure if that can be considered revolution, lastly, but it was revolution for them, at least by themselves. So I think this has impacted because they had to be diametrically opposite to what Mahendra stood for. They resorted to them having singular command within the areas that they were operating in, and this has created this strange fascination with authoritarianism with the present leadership as well. This is just my observation. There could be many different things that can be said about these things. For example, because some parties come from communist ideology and they believe in one party communist system, etc., they could be authoritarian, and that makes a perfect sense as well. But I think them starting their political career at times of Panchayat where civil discourses were banned, where they also had to lead their command and had to create military-like forces by themselves, I think that also has impacted in their fascination with authoritarianism in the modern times too. But that being said, I think the other impact of Panchayat in modern politics of Nepal is that Panchayat promoted a single Nepali identity. And they actively led creation of Nepali nationalism associated with Nepali language, Hinduism, and Dauras as well. This is also an important consideration to note because many indigenous community of Nepal do not relate to all three things. If you go to the eastern part of Nepal, the Kirat practice their own religion. There are other different ethnicities that practice their own religion, their own language, and their own dresses, right? They wear their own ornaments that are very unique to their culture, etc. But because there was aggressive push of Nepali identity, not just from the political mainstream, but also because they were able to decentralize Nepal into different structures, they were able to send people who were closer to the state to advance similar forms of state-led propaganda in the grassroots too. And this impacted a lot of identity groups in the ground. And these grievances has led to a different form of alternative identity politics being formed in Nepal. And I think this is also a very important impact in modern politics, especially in a sense that this really provided a strong push to Maoist movement and Maoist civil war or Maoist war or whatever that we would want to call that. or Maoist armed revolution. I think this really impacted and provided force to Maoists to operate in those areas too. I hope that answers Amisa's question as well. Finally, again, coming to identity groups and identity politics, Citizenship Act of 1964 had few provisions such as one, ambiguous definition of Nepali origin. If you Google Citizenship Act of 1964, you'll find this yourself as well. To be Nepali citizen, you need to be someone from Nepali origin. This is something that was written in the Citizenship Act of 1964. But there was ambiguity surrounding the definition of Nepali origin. There was no specification as to what Nepali origin actually meant, which meant that many people in Madhes or Tarai, or whatever we would want to call the southern plains of Nepal, were denied of citizenship because they were unable to prove that they were from Nepali origins, because the region also has large number of people who were at some point from India and had some Indian origins within themselves too. So this ambiguity of definition of Nepali origin meant that many people were denied statehood and did not have any enfranchisement whatsoever. So this also led to a problem. Enfranchisement in a sense that panchayat still at election, you'd still be able to vote for individuals within the councils that were formed. So there was enfranchisement and there was voting within panchayat as well, but it was very, very unfair, and only people that were close to state would win elections anyway. I'll come to that in a moment. But second is that there was deliberate provision of fluency of oral and written Nepali language as provision for citizenship. Again, like I said in the very beginning, Nepali has not been something that was universally spoken throughout all identity groups. And this especially impacted the Tarai region, the southern plains of Nepal, because specifically many people living in those regions were unable to speak Nepali because they oftentimes communicated in their own indigenous language, such as Mithila language, such as Avadi language, Tharu language, and other languages that were in the plains of southern Nepal. And this really impacted their access to state and access to citizenship. And this has been one of the biggest concern in the present as well, because there are many people who had been denied citizenship in the past who were unable to get citizenship before the abolishment of monarchy in Nepal too. But this did not just affect the Madhesi community. Many other communities who did not identify with the Nepali nationalism that was pushed by Mahendra and Panchayat were also denied of all of these things. All right. But was there anything unique in Mahendra's imposition, or was it just the skill? So I think there are a few impositions that came from Mahendra. During the time of Panchayat, Nepal was not recognized as multicultural nation. For example, now Nepal is considered to be a multicultural, multi-religious, multilingual country. Mahendra refused to identify Nepal as multicultural. So I think that's one thing that was unique. Second was they proposed Education Act, which required everybody to study in Nepali language, which meant that there was a push from the state to promote Nepali language within the territories of Nepal. This was a problem because many people in Nepal did not speak Nepali language at that time. And it was because of this enforcement that many people are starting to speak Nepali. I think there are two sides to this debate as well. I don't want to sound controversial, but I do not support that personally because it's really abhorrent. But I think there can be disagreements to it, and I also see pros of it too, because now probably we have better way to communicate with people. But at that particular time, because it came at the cost of restricting people and people's access to language and culture, it was achieved with that means, and that's really not nice. And third thing that Mahendra did was there was also restriction in terms of other foreign nationals and other foreign entities operating in Nepal, because Mahendra thought that, and the Panchayat largely thought that those could be factors of introducing newer religions in Nepal. And that's not something desirable, etc. So I think in these three regards that Mahendra was unique in terms of in terms of promoting the Hindu identity that was central to Nepal. Also, I think even though the core tenet of Saha dynasty was Hinduism and process of Hinduization, I think they weren't aggressive in a way that they tried to not let other culture practice their own. Because I think before 2007, especially due to Rana regime, many everything that had happened within the Saha community, the Saha monarchy, was in regards to fighting with the Ranas and conspiring with other groups to overthrow Ranas, etc., where they did not focus more on promoting the nationalism that probably Prithvi Narayan Shah at one specific point of time had thought about. So I think Mahendra was really, really just carried forward what Prithvi Narayan Shah had wanted to in the modern times. So that's how it makes him different too. But you could also argue that he just wanted to, continue what Prithvi Narayan Shah and everybody else wanted. But I think the difference is that Prithvi Narayan Shah also was ready to compromise, in a sense that Prithvi Narayan Shah negotiated a deal where, Kirat people in the eastern Nepal would still have right of self-determination, right of autonomy in exchange of them accepting Nepal as their country. So I think in that regards too, there are some separations, and Mahendra was not ready to make those concessions as well. So I think this clarifies many things. Increase in change of original religion to Christianity. I don't have comment about this, because I think people should be free to choose whatever religion that they want to. So I'm not sure if I'm able to answer if there is harm to Nepali culture, because I'm not sure what Nepali culture is largely, because Nepal is so diverse and so multicultural and multinational. So I don't really see the harm that would be caused by any other external factors that hasn't been already created. So I am incapable of answering that question, and I also really don't have opinion about that specific issues too. All right. Moving on, systematic disenfranchisement of several identity groups. I think that's the conclusion of everything that I said. But again, this is something that I believe in. There are many people who think that Panchayat was really, really crucial in making certain that Nepal remained an independent state, etc. I'm not sure if that argumentation has merit on it, but I recommend you guys to go out and look at those opinions as well if you really want to have a more neutral idea of what Nepali politics looks like. All right, moving on. So, re-establishment of democracy. So, in 1990, multi-party political alliance led the People's Movement, Nepali Congress and United Leftist Front. United Leftist Front was alliance between different Communist Party of Nepal that were operating in Nepal. So because political parties were banned during Panchayat, political parties weren't able to conduct their operations as much. But even with ban in political parties, many members of Nepali Congress and other political parties who were part of political parties but weren't officially the part of political parties were able to get into the Panchayat parliament, or whatever they call it, and they all right, so there is a question. I'll come to that in a moment as well. Or I'll answer that and then. Okay, I don't agree anyone has halted practicing any religion or language, which wasn't even recognized as Nepal was integrated. Again, I do understand that argument, but I don't agree with it. And you can have that opinion too. I'm not, it's really open to you to look into it too. But I don't think there can be any denial on people of different identity groups not being able to practice their identity as much. If that was true, there wouldn't be movement that would be supported by majority of indigenous community, that would be led by those groups of people, and election being won and lost in regards to those identity politics, and wars being fought because of identity, etc. So there is merit to other argument too. Probably the incorporation of the Hindu Brahmin elite ideology was able to institute and protect sovereignty of Nepal, in a sense that they were able to, fight against um, Indian will of making Indian subcontinent as India and their desire to Sikimize Nepal, etc. Probably there is a merit to that argument. But I think those things could have been done without people being restricted in practicing their religion through lack of state endorsement of the same. So there definitely is merit to that argument. But I think the point I'm trying to make here is because of Panchayat's policy, the identity politics of Nepal in the present has fostered too, which probably has created more division within Nepal as well. So the point I am trying to make here isn't this was absolutely wrong or this was absolutely abhorrent. The point I'm trying to make here is that this led to identity politics in the present Nepali context. This led to identity politics, which probably has impacted Nepali politics to a large degree. Even though personally I think it was really abhorrent, I see the merit, I see the argument in the other side, even though I do not really credit that argument as much. I hope that answers your question, but you definitely can have your own disagreements. I am happy to engage with it further after the session is over. All right. All right, there's another question which I'll go to because I think it's relevant again. The country is diverse and geographically divided. The people were denied of a lot of basic rights and subject to massive extraction. How did the country not splinter, considering it would be very hard for the center to enforce its will in places without law for this imposed identity, nationalism, and culture? Thus, it did not splinter, if I'm not wrong, country, as especially if you do not consider, was the case, especially considering. All right, I think this is a very interesting look at what had happened in Nepal, but I think I don't know what would have happened in the counterfactual because I don't have picture of it. I did not, if the policy was presented differently, if people were allowed to practice their own, allowed to practice and preserve their own languages, the languages that they spoke, their mother tongue, etc., like they do in the present. For example, like in the present, for example, if you see a few things, in the present too, Nepali is still taught throughout. Nepali language is still recognized as national language, but people are still allowed to practice, education in their own mother tongue. They're still allowed to, for example, certain provinces can entertain certain languages that are majority in their regions as national languages too, and all languages are recognized as national languages. All languages are recognized as national languages. So these are the differences that have ensured that people have more freedom as well. Can you deny the fact that, okay, I think this is just, this argumentation again has merit. All right, Mahendra constructed a lot of things. Panchayat did a lot of good, etc. Panchayat did do a lot of reform. Panchayat had to cater to certain groups of people anyway, because without that, you do not get any forms of legitimacy. To rule any countries, even with military power, you need legitimacy from the ground. For example, China, even though it's not democracy, still has legitimacy from people because people are not frustrated to a degree where they are willing to sacrifice their own life to go out and fight to form a democracy, for example. So Panchayat had to do it to survive for themselves. And Panchayat was eventually overthrown. Panchayat was eventually overthrown by movements that were led throughout the world. Panchayat also killed a lot of people who went against them. Panchayat also imprisoned a lot of people who spoke or sang against them. I think there are plenty of examples. I would give an anecdotal example, but that would not be relevant. I think this is a debate that's going on for a long time. But if Panchayat and monarchy were working, we wouldn't see the changes and frustration and revolutions and people willing to die, etc., to overthrow those rules. But I don't think that's the point of this session. I think, Prabhat, you can text me in WhatsApp later on. We can have a long chat about this. We can also read different things about things that had happened in the past, talk more about it, talk to more people, probably research about it too, and get into different conclusions as well. But I really think we should move on to discuss more about basics of Nepali politics. All right, again, this is my opinion. So of course there can be disagreements. You can disagree with me. And you can also probably talk to people about your own opinions as well at later half of this session. Okay, so what happened after reestablishment of democracy? First, we had Constitution of Nepal of 1990. This constitution is often viewed as more progressive. It incorporated a larger group of people. It recognized Nepal as a multicultural country. It recognized languages. It recognized other things of Nepal, which was seen as reform, which is seen as reform by significant majority of people, even though some people may disagree with it. But many people really agree with the progression that Nepal made after this constitution, even though this constitution also had their own problems. But I think many see this as a vehicle of change and progression in Nepal. Second is Nepal saw economic liberalization, and in Nepali politics there, throughout specific period of time, we've seen specific kind of narrative being spread. Post 1990, the narrative was, during the time of Panchayat, the narrative that government tried to push was of development, which said, in Nepali it's called Bikas. So Panchayat wanted to push this narrative of development, which centered around infrastructure development, which centered around people being provided with larger amount of access through communication and infrastructure, etc. After 1990, it was Bazaar or market in English. The political mainstream and the government wanted to push that Bazaar or market is the foundation or vehicle for development to occur. In the present, it's Samriddhi, which is prosperity, which is seen more as a holistic combination of Vikas, Bazaar, and also general happiness of people. So over the course of time, we've seen these forms of narratives being pushed throughout the time, and post 1990, the first narrative that we saw was of Bazaar, which is economic liberalization and introduction of liberal economy to Nepal, which was relatively closed, where Mahendra did not necessarily entertain investment coming out from other countries and other MNCs specifically, etc., 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 or even Birendra at the later part of Panchayat too. So after a certain period of time of democracy, we saw Maoist war from 1996 to 2006. We'll come to that in a moment. The other important event that happened was Rural Massacre. We don't know who caused it. We don't know what was the issue, but it was really, really significant. And it changed the nature of politics from the very beginning of time. Because I think before Rural Massacre, there was a truce going on between the rebel force and the government. They were in constant talks with one another. But after that, Rural Massacre occurred, and it changed the dynamic of Nepali politics. And oftentimes it is also seen as the start of end of monarchy in Nepal. Then Gyanedra's rule of 2002 to 2006. So Gyanendra again overthrew the democratically elected government and then took power within himself, like his father did, and wanted to impose similar kind of provisions, but it later failed, and we are now in modern political times of Nepal. So after that, Maoist civil war, I've kept that in column because it's not a civil war in a sense that majority of people did not fought against the state. It was a political movement that was led by a certain group that has support of certain population of the country, but they call it civil war. It is officially recognized as Sashastra Dwanda, which is called armed, what's Dwanda in English? Armed warfare? I don't know, armed conflict. All right, armed conflict. It's officially called armed conflict. It is recognized as armed conflict, but the former Maoist push that this was civil war. But I think politically and academically, there is an agreement that this was not an all-out civil war because majority of people still did not support the movement. But because it has significant support from significant number of people, and this impacted how Nepal is seen largely politically, this is a very important thing to discuss. How did Maoist civil war start? I think this can be traced back a long time. This can be traced back to Panchayat, where there were splinters within the Communist Party of the past who wanted to overthrow monarchy and establish one-party communist system from the very beginning of the fight against Panchayat. Ever since the Communist Party were established, there was, because of influence of Cold War, probably because of influence of Soviet Union and expansion of communism throughout the world, there was also a group that wanted to establish communism in Nepal. So this can be traced back to that particular time. But something that we can definitely go back to is 40 points demand that was put by Baburam Bhattarai on behalf of Communist Party of Nepal Maoist to Sher-Bahadur Dewa's government. This 40 points demand included abolishment of privileges of monarchy, establishment of People's Republic, delegation of rights to minorities as indigenous community, etc. I will send, if you guys want, I will send the link of 40 points demand after the session is over. I had attached the link in the speaker notes here, but I don't think it can be accessible while presenting, so I'll do that later on. All right, I will do that after the session. Please remind me at the end of the session. So the Maoist Civil War was organized between 1996 to 2006. Over 17,000 people were killed because of the civil war or because of the armed conflict that Nepal saw between 1996 to 2006. Many reported war crimes were observed. That is, it's not just the people who were fighting were killed. It's also, there are many crimes against humanity that have been reported. There are many cases that are still not heard. There's Truth and Reconciliation Commission that is significantly handicapped and is not able to pursue any forms of justice because of political interest of people lying in the both sides of the war, etc. So, the biggest seen grievances out of Maoist revolution or Maoist war is that many people who are victims of war are still denied justice. And these groups of people probably, with what we've seen in Nepal in the present, will probably not get the justice that is fair or proportionate to them. So that's one of the grievances that we can see of Maoist civil war. However, I think Maoist civil war also has had some amount of element of them being vehicle for progressive change, even though many people can argue, and this is the argument that I believe personally as well, these changes probably could have been achieved through dialogues, through less military presence, but more non-violent protests, etc., etc., etc. But I think there were some significance of why Maoist war went to war and why they were able to sustain for 10 years. We'll try to discuss it here as well. First is that there was dominant presence of Dalit community, indigenous community, Dalit community, indigenous community, and people from the rural area of Nepal within the Maoist movement. There was significant support of these groups of people. It is largely because these groups of people never thought that the state did justice to them. I think also Maoist revolution started from the western part of Nepal, which is largely seen as the part that isn't really developed so well, that has highest amount of illiteracy, that had at least highest amount of unemployment and lesser amount of infrastructural development and more terrains and hills, etc., which was used as strategic points by the Maoists while they were at the course of revolution too. So they were largely, even though they were ruled by the Brahmin elites again in the very top, but I think in the bottom, in the grassroots, many people from the backward communities were able to find something within the movements. They also ran parallel governments. They also ran parallel judiciaries. They, they had their own systems within their movement, which was probably a lot of problem. It caused a lot of rife between a lot of groups of people in the country, but it also is seen as vehicle for progressive changes experienced post 2006, because a lot of the changes that has happened after 2006 are the changes that Maoists initially demanded for. Things such as federalism, things such as abolishment of privileges of monarchy, things such as establishment of I think someone is unmuted. Can they mute themselves? All right. So this has been seen as vehicle for progressive changes, especially in regards to rights to identity groups, especially in regards to rights to women and other minorities that we have seen in the country. I think Maoist movement was able to provide some forms of right to them as well. For example, secularism, federalism, Republican country, etc. All of them were the demands that were posed by Maoist civil war or Maoist armed conflict. So yes, they are seen as progressive vehicle for progressive change too. But this is hugely controversial due to the violent nature of war, even today. I mentioned this in the previous slide too. This is still very controversial, but I think this also has merit in where we are as a country in the present. But Maoist civil war was officially ended with the Comprehensive Peace Accord of 2006. You can again find the Comprehensive Peace Accord on the internet. It's easily available. You can just Google Comprehensive Peace Accord of 2006. It was signed between government led by Girija Prasad Koirala and Prachanda. But the criticism that is surrounding Comprehensive Peace Accord is that Maoists did not fight war against the government that was formed post 2006 revolution, which meant that the agreement between the parties, the Comprehensive Peace Accord is agreement between two parties that already were in agreement with one another. But even though this is not a criticism, this is an interesting observation that we can make, because this agreement wasn't signed between two political parties that were fighting against one another, or two political entities that were fighting against one another. But also important consideration that I missed in this slide was that 7-party alliance and Maoist signed 12-point understanding between themselves, and they combined against Gyanedra's rule, and Maoists were operationalizing their own basis. They were supporting the 7-party alliance in creating their own movements, and they simultaneously led the fight against Shah monarchy post 2005 November, and we finally were able to re-establish the House of Representatives that Gyanendra had dissolved in May, if I'm not wrong, or probably at April. I'm not sure about the dates. Please reconfirm. But after that, that started the decline of monarchy, and that effectively was the fall of monarchy at large. All right, I think there was a question. I'll quickly look at it before we move on. We know Maoist Laraku went to India to collect weapons and support. So India's influence in civil war and what the advantage they would have due to it. I don't think that I can have opinion about this, because I don't know if they actually went to it. Probably. So did India have influence in civil war? Probably, because of their geopolitical interests. Do I know about it? I'm not sure. I probably don't know about it. So it wouldn't be fair for me to answer these questions. Did India explicitly support Maoist? They did not, until they facilitated the 12-point agreement. So I'm not sure if I'm able to answer this question properly. But that being said, I think many important leaders of the Maoist movement were sheltering in India. For example, Pushpa Kamal Dahal Prachanda, who led the movement, was reportedly sheltered in India. Many other political leaders, such as I forgot his name, Kiran, Mohan Vaidya Kiran, he was arrested in India though. So I'm not sure what role India played. Probably they played some amount of role. I think it's subject to more research, more academic discussion, and probably if somebody within the Maoist movement will, or say for example, India or RAW will probably someday go out and admit it. I think without that, we wouldn't ever be sure about the role or the influence that India or even China had in civil war of Nepal. So I hope that answers your questions. I'm really sorry that I'm not able to confirm or answer or not answer that question properly. All right, moving on. People's Movement of 2006. So what happened after People's Movement of 2006? This is also known as People's Movement 2.0, because the first movement, People's Movement, is 1990s movement. So I'll just refer, this is also popularly referred to as April Revolution, but this term is used largely by the foreign academics. All right, so there's another question. Why would India always want to help us in their language? What do they expect from us? I'll come to that in a moment when we'll be discussing Nepal's foreign policy. So I'll just quickly summarize the basics of Nepali politics now, and then go on to larger discussion about what I think is the, is the intention behind some groups of people. Okay, that being said, This paved way for secularism, republican state, and federalism, restricted all powers of monarchy, paved way for integration of CP and Maoist into the mainstream politics. And this also led to interim constitution that replaced the constitution of 1990, and then election of Constituent Assembly. All right, if you guys, I think this is quite straightforward, so I will not move into it as much, because I also think many people remember all of these things happening in their lifetime too, I hope. If so, I will not talk more about this, but largely this movement was again led by the 7-party alliance that were mainstream political parties before Gyanendra took power. This movement was also supported by the Maoist, and this movement was largely also conducted by the civil society members, many people like Khagendra Sangraula and other people, Padma, Ratnatuladhar, and other people, all of these important people, civil society that were independent of any political parties, also helped the movement to take shape that it did, because many people were also not really supporting the political parties back then because of frustration that they had with them. But because Gyanendra was threatening to take away any forms of democratic rights, many people came out to the street. This is oftentimes seen as one of the largest independent movement that Nepal saw in its history. So this is very significant in that regard too. All right, so what happened after that? So after that, we finally conducted the Constituent Assembly's election. The first Constituent Assembly election was conducted in, if I'm not wrong, 2064, which I'm not sure what the date would be in Nepali. I think it's 2007 or 8. I think it's 2008. So, however, the first Constituent Assembly failed to deliver Constitution of Nepal, pushing the country into prolonged transition and uncertainty. Post 2006, we had very, very long transition, in a sense that we were unable to get constitution in initially declared 2 years time, which was again, we added the time to 2 more years, and finally, we weren't able to draft constitution through our Constituent Assembly. However, there were a few good things that the first Constituent Assembly did. That is, one, it officially declared Nepal as a federal democratic republic. I missed the federal part, but we were declared as Sanghiya Loktantrik Ganatantra, which means a federal democratic republic. And there were also other few considerations. It also highlighted different issues that were surrounding around the legislation that had happened in the past. It also fostered the civil-military relationship that I haven't mentioned in the slide, but it effectively ensured that the military, the police, and other structures that were previously seen as closer to the, to the royal family were officially integrated back to the public by improving the civil-military relationship, by making them under the part of defense ministry, etc. All of those structural changes were achieved in the first CA election, in the first Constituent Assembly itself. So it's a good thing that it happened. But after that, second CA election was conducted, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in 2017. That would be, I think, 2014, if I'm not sure. I'm not sure about the dates, but the takeaway from here is that second CA election was conducted, and the second Constituent Assembly was able to deliver constitution as well. I will not go into discussions about constitutions. There are many debates surrounding the way that constitution was delivered. There are many discussions surrounding, and there are many political ramifications that came out of constitution that was delivered as well. But I will not go into it as much, because in the present specifically, it's not very, very, very relevant, even though it's something that I would recommend all of you to research more about and talk about and form your own opinion. So the takeaway is the second CA election was able to deliver constitution. How did politicians break the deadlock that existed for 10 years? I think there are a few factors. First, in 2072 or in 2015, we were hit by deadly earthquake that killed a lot of Nepali people, which meant that the government wanted to ensure that country is not in a prolonged transition, in a prolonged political transition, and there's some forms of certainty. So political parties came together and decided that they would deliver constitution. What were some oppositions to it? There was a movement fostering in the southern plains of Nepal, in Tarai, and it was also not, this constitution, India also recommended that the constitution be not release at times of their election because they assumed that there would be some forms of instability in Nepal as well. But that did not, that did not let the politicians of Nepal back then be compromised, and they went ahead and promulgate the constitution anyway. So that had happened. I recommend you research about the other things that I mentioned so that I can move forward with this as well. Okay, so what's happening now and what does Nepal's federal structure looks like? In the present, Nepal has a 3-tier system where we have federal government, provincial government, and local governments. We have 7 provinces, 77 districts, and 753 local units. Or in Nepali, they are called Staniya Taha, Jillaharu, ra Pradeshharu. Nepal's federal parliament has 2 chamber parliament. They are House of Representatives and National Assembly. This is general federal structure of Nepal. We vote in all of it. In Nepal, initially we had local levels election, and after that we had federal and provincial election, probably 3 or 4 years ago. So that's that. In House of Representatives, there are 275 members. 165 members are elected through direct election in their respective constituency. That is, you go out in your own constituency and vote for one specific candidate, and that candidate with the highest number of votes will win that election. And 110 are elected through proportional electorate election, where the entire country is treated as one single constituency, and you vote for political parties, and political parties have to fulfill a certain inclusive criteria, and they through that process you elect 110 people. Similarly, National Assembly has 59 members, 8 each from each provinces, and they are elected via electoral college. Sorry. Okay, I'll come to that in a moment. 8 each are from each provinces, and they are elected via electoral college. That is, people that you elected in provincial parliament in the local level can vote for the members of National Assembly, and three of the people are nominated by the president. In the National Assembly as well, there is an affirmative action, and you have to fulfill a certain degree of proportionality, and that's the structure. I recommend you research more about it as well. I think we can operate a separate session, Nepal's affirmative actions and Nepal's inclusion policy, but I don't think this session will be able to cover that. And each province has their own provincial assembly. There's a question: do I think that Nepal needs seven provinces with their ministries, etc.? I personally think that Nepal does, because Nepal has history of centralized unitary development throughout history. During the time of Ranas, development was centered really around areas that they controlled. During the times of Sahas, it was the central areas of Nepal that were developed, etc. And Nepal did not necessarily had fruitful development out of the development reasons that Birendra had introduced to Nepal. If I'm not mistaken, I think Birendra divided Nepal into 5 developmental zones, but I may not be true as well. If I'm not, please correct it. But the point is, I don't think the development reasons that Nepal was divided into was able to yield result as well. But I think a system where you are able to elect your own representatives, and those representatives are tasked with developing policies that are centered toward that specific reasons, I think your possibility of development is higher. Because I think if Kathmandu only has one government, if Nepal's government is only centered around Kathmandu, I think the grievances of Karnali and the grievances of other parts of Nepal wouldn't really reach into Kathmandu, because there are many other structural problems that they would be confined upon themselves as well. But that being said, I do think there are many challenges, because Nepal has limited resources, and also, by the nature of how Nepal was divided into federal structures, many provinces do not necessarily have self-sustaining economic resources, resources that they can yield money out of, etc., which has led to things such as you having to increase taxes in order to sustain all of these things. There are criticisms of it as well. I understand the criticisms, but I think this largely is better than the system that we had in the past. But that's my opinion. I think people can have different opinion about this too. Yeah, Nepal is not so rich, but I think if you delegate certain groups of people to do a certain kind of things and to try to become self-sustaining, because I think all the provinces have to sustain themselves, I think this can be a method as to how you increase your possibility of economic development too. So that's my opinion, but there can be disagreements, and there definitely is other side to that too. But I strongly believe in what I just said. All right, with that being said, moving on. Nepal's foreign policy. All right, so I think we will again have some disagreements and many discussions in this part too. But I think Nepal historically has operated in non-aligned foreign policy. That is, Nepal was part of the non-aligned movement during the period of Cold War, where Nepal did not side into any of the two big superpowers, USSR and US. So yes, Nepal has had non-aligned policy for a long period of time, in principle at least. So Nepal's foreign policy are constructed in a similar way, where we do not necessarily align with anyone, but that doesn't mean Nepal stays neutral on everything. Non-alliance and neutrality are different. Nepal, of course, has its own say in international community, supports a specific kind of things, but Nepal, in terms of their foreign policy, supports Panchshil. I think there are 5 policies in Panchshil: non-interference, non-alignment, etc., etc., etc. You can research about, you can Google about them, because I don't know in top of my head what those 5 things are. But basically, Nepal is non-aligned. Nepal does not believe in interference. If Nepal, ideally does not support intervention that goes on in international community as well. So this is what Nepal usually is in terms of foreign policy. Nepal has historically been closer to India because of different things, because of similar culture, because of similar societal structures, etc. in ancient times. But in modern times, the modern Nepal was recognized as a state by India in the very beginning, and we only got the international recognition as a sovereign state in 1955. So India played a crucial role to that, which also meant that India and Nepal went on to have historically closer relationship in terms of modern times as well. Nepal signed India-Nepal Friendship Treaty of 1950, which preceded any other agreements that we had with the British. But second, also provided platform for Nepal and India to trade better, to become better allies within themselves, and to improve their friendship within each other. But secondly, there are many criticisms of India-Nepal Friendship Treaty, because this treaty has been over time criticized as, which I rightly think is being criticized as, something that favors India more than Nepal, in a sense that we have to, for example, consult with India to do trade beyond India. We have to consult with India to buy weapons that our military probably needs, etc., etc., etc. Even though the language constituted in the agreement says both governments will consult with one another, but because of sheer nature of how India is, how big India is, how India does not need Nepal, etc., they do not value the treaty in a way that it should be, which has made certain that the treaty has been really unfair. And there has been many talks throughout the course of time about, making certain that this treaty is either cancelled. One of the 40 points demand of Maoist movement was also to cancel the treaty at large. But there were also many other discourses about, probably improving the words that are written, or the provisions that would ensure that Nepal wasn't in a similar way as India. I think the fact that has been mentioned in the chat is true, and I don't disagree with it at all. I also think India hasn't been a good friend of Nepal historically. It's an open secret that India wanted to integrate Nepal into their own territory at the very beginning, especially in the reign of Indira Gandhi and Rajiv Gandhi, which is really, really horrible. So I don't think India has been a good friend to Nepal, but Nepal's foreign policy and Nepal's diplomacy has meant that Nepal and Nepali politicians have historically found themselves closer to India because of geographical similarities, because of easier access, because of many other things. So thirdly, Nepal's foreign policy also supports one China policy, which means that Nepal thinks that Macau, Taiwan, Tibet are part of China, Hong Kong are part of China. They strongly, strongly discourage and even arrest people who try to, not support one China policy for strategic reason itself, because China is huge. China has large economic and political influence in Nepal as well, which has meant that Nepal supports one China policy as well. But supporting one China policy has meant that Nepal have had to compromise few of their principal, principal setup that they had, probably in regards to treating Tibetan refugees who do not necessarily are recognized as refugees and are oftentimes not provided with similar forms of reliefs and similar forms of benefits that refugees are entitled to, etc. This has made life of Tibetan refugees very difficult. But this has been done because of geostrategic reasons, and I think it's understandable as well. I think the discussion about the humanitarian aspect of it is a separate debate, which we can have, probably in the future as well. But I think Tibetan refugees and the crisis relating to Tibetan refugees is also something that Nepal has to deal with foreign policy. And finally, because Nepal is situated between India and China, as Prithvinarayan Saha and other people have rightly identified from the very beginning, from the beginning of modern history of Nepal, I think Nepal has to be very strategic in terms of how they deal with their foreign countries, and they have to make policies accordingly as well. So that's geopolitics, and Nepal's geostrategy is also an important consideration that Nepal has to take in order to ensure that they have good foreign policy. There have been many hiccups over the course of time in Nepali foreign policy as well. So I think those hiccups are very, some of the hiccups are quite immature, in a sense that Nepal probably would be better served to dealing with certain issues without, relating itself into jingoistic or nationalistic narratives. But I think Nepal has to be realistic. This is my opinion again. Nepal has to be realistic because we do not have strong economy. We do not have a strong military because we're situated in a very, in a very, very, very tricky position geographically. We have to be very, very careful, and we shouldn't let the extreme nationalism deteriorate our relationship with any of our two neighbors. This also looks like probably limiting the anti-India sentiment within the politics in Nepal, probably also limiting or probably not being as aggressive in pursuit of anything that that compromises Chinese interest, because if China isn't your ally, China will be coercive power against you, and that's probably even worse. So yes, I think that's where I stand in terms of where Nepal should see itself in their own foreign policy. I think Nepal has to be very realistic and try to form collaboration and try to be, the bridge between two great nations. This is something that Baburam Bhatta and many other people repeat a lot, but I'm not sure how that can be achieved. But I think Nepal has to try to be as non-aligned as possible. Nuclear power required for Nepal. I don't think Nepal can prioritize nuclear power right now, because Nepal has other issues to deal with, For example, Nepal has hunger, poverty. Nepal has environmental issues. Nepal has other issues to deal with. Nepal has infrastructural issues. I don't think Nepal in the present should prioritize their focus in making nuclear power, one. But second, if you make nuclear power, you also invite other international actors in Nepal. Probably United States will be more aggressive. You'll be termed as rogue state all around. And I think that's really bad for Nepal's development in terms of Nepal's relationship with other countries too. So I don't think Nepal requires nuclear power in the present. Even if Nepal has nuclear power, I don't think that makes any difference to two countries in terms of war as well. I don't think that there will be a full-fledged nuclear war against the two countries, because there are too much economic harms to both of the nations that they would be unwilling to take, and also because people don't want to go out in all out war against one another in the present, especially in democracy. So I don't think Nepal requires to build nuclear power in the present. All right, moving on. So what does Nepal's current political climate looks like? Okay, first part of this is that Nepal Communist Party holds a close to supermajority in the House of Representatives. Nepali Congress is the biggest opposition. KP Oli is the Prime Minister of Nepal. This is the general overview of Nepal's current political structure. All right, that's a very interesting question. I'll come to that in a moment. I'll just complete this other slide too. So current political climate again. Recently, MCC created a big political debate in Nepal. I went to that. I talked about it in the very beginning as well. Until very recently, there was an internal fear for it within the ruling party, almost causing the split in the party. That is, the Communist Party of Nepal almost split it because of feud within the party, especially between KP Sharma Oli and Prachanda / Mahakumbha Nepal. It's because I don't know the exact reasons behind it, but from speculations that we generally can make, it was probably because of some agreements that was agreed beforehand during the unity of the party, which wasn't kept from one party or the other, and also political self-interest within the parties that had risen as well. Third thing that we see currently is populism. I think this populism was really evident during the election of Nepal. Just give me a second, I'll grab a bottle of water. You guys can drop questions. I'll be back in 5 seconds. All right, I'm back. So yes, populism is quite evident. Populism that comes in forms of nationalism, in forms of anti-India, anti-US, or MCC, or other things of that sort that we've seen in the present, that is likely to sound very popular within the grassroots and within normal people who probably are very frustrated with the elite of who are ruling the governments, etc. But finally, identity politics probably is also gaining some forms of relevance. Okay. All right. I will now answer a few of the questions before I move on. Since Nepal has authoritative tendencies, do you think that this will be exacerbated if Nepal progresses its relation with China? I don't think relationship with China specifically affects that as much, because I think China even now is interested more in economy and in maintaining that Nepal is not unstable and Nepal does not become a ground for anti-China activities, which probably means, activities that are done by the Tibetans for Free Tibet movement, activities that are done by other groups that do not have Chinese interests. So I don't necessarily see if relationship with China will mean that Nepal will become more authoritative, because I think Nepali democracy is still somewhat strong, and Nepali people, because of their quest to democracy, have fought for very long, and they probably will fight again if people's right will be taken away, etc. So I don't necessarily see that Nepal becoming more authoritarian by virtue of its relationship with China. But in general, I think because of this fascination with authoritarianism and romanticization of similar leaders, for example, KP Sharma Oli really fascinates Lee Kuan Yew and the rule that Lee Kuan Yew imposed in Singapore, etc. I think these factors probably play more role in making Nepal, more authoritative, passing more authoritarian policies, etc., rather than Nepal's relationship with China. All right, second question. Is non-aligned movement still relevant, or it has only been, yeah, all right. I personally don't think that globally, realistically, non-aligned movement is really that powerful. Non-aligned movement has always been, the movement that had developing nations that wanted to create collective power by themselves. So in a sense that I don't necessarily see that non-aligned movement as a movement of a collective countries has much relevance or more power in the present. But secondly, I think Nepal, if follows non-aligned policy in terms of maintaining their relationship with India or China, I think that's more beneficial to Nepal in a sense that Nepal do not have to align to any specific country or their own policies or have to agree or disagree to everything that they say. I think that policy probably serves Nepal better. So I hope that answers your question. Also, I think in current political climate, alignment and polarization, and certain countries supporting certain countries and other countries being supporters of other countries are very common. And because of economic dependencies and because of exponential economic rise of certain countries, I think many countries have to be dependent on them. So largely, I think you have to be reliant or you have to be trading with some countries anyway. So I'm not sure as to how much value that non-aligned movement as in general has. But I think it's a good policy to strive for, and it's a good principle that Nepal tries to uphold to. And I think Nepal should still try to best of their ability, approach non-alignment. So are Congress and NCP abiding by their current principle, capitalism and communism? I think Congress also support socialism. I think they identify themselves as socialist party, if I'm not wrong. So I don't think that both parties are socialist or communist. I think both are very, very capitalist. And especially we've seen many instances of crony capitalism in the present, while both the parties were in power itself. So I don't think that both parties are abiding by their core principle, but I also think that the core principle that they align with is much relevant to the modern Nepal. I think Nepal has to strive to create more welfare and become more welfare state, but that doesn't mean that probably would mean that both the parties have to give up the core values that they have, and they have also given up their core values, I think, because NCP doesn't no longer wants to establish a one-party totalitarian communist regime, and Congress also doesn't want to establish a socialist country largely. I think both parties now agree in capitalism as and economic growth as prime factors of economic development. But I think NCP is more for more taxes, more welfare, etc., and Congress is less for that. So I think that's the difference that they have. But I don't think both are abiding by their core principles. All right, I think this is a very interesting question again. Is the world driving towards multi-alignment? First, I think multi-alignment is a very interesting concept because from multi-alignment, I am assuming that you mean countries pursuing relationship with countries that they are probably not in the best of the terms with, or they probably aligning with countries that they probably wouldn't be aligned with in the past. I think this has the economic growth that we have seen throughout the world post Cold War has resulted to this very good phenomena where world is unlikely to go to all out war or even proxy wars as much as they would in the past because there are economic interests tied between one another. So I do think that world is moving towards more collaborative politics rather than the international unilateral anarchy that we had seen in the past. Because in the past, I think, even though I still believe that internationally we still have anarchy in a sense that many developed countries will never abide by international laws, but I think we are headed in a way better direction that we did in the past, in a sense that we now have more collaborations between one another. I don't think Russia and US will ever go to war again. China and United States probably will not go to war as well. China and India are dependent with one another. Russia and India probably were still friends during the Cold War too, but they are also trading with one another, etc., which means that world is unlikely to go into wars, is unlikely to see the degree of inter-country wars that we had seen in the past. So I think this is a positive, but that doesn't mean that world is now a better place to live in. I think, there are many other wars that are happening internally within the countries. There are internationalization of those wars, which has damaged relations of these countries too. But I think in general, we're heading towards a direction of more liberalized world with more economic collaboration and lesser focus on, the demonstration of power that we used to see during Cold War. Why does India always want to help us, and what do they expect from us? I think India sees Nepal as, first, they see Nepal as, as something that are very similar to their country. So I think India has over time shown that they do not necessarily see Nepal as, entirely sovereign or independent country, which is really, really bad. So that's how India probably sees us, one. But second, I think, what does India want from us? I think India wants to have influence in Nepal so that they can influence Nepal to support them internationally, one. Second, they also want Nepal to be used as a territory of defense against China at probably times of any forms of war or anything of that sort. So they want to have significant influence within Nepal so that they can tackle or they can fight with China and Chinese influence that they do not like. What else does India want from us? I think India generally wants Nepal to not be really unstable, because that also affects India's security. So I think those are the things that India would want from Nepal. They want Nepal to side with India more than anyone else. They want Nepal to, they want Nepal to just be their very close ally so that they can use Nepal at times of crisis, etc. Do you think our democracy is mature enough, citizens aware enough to have a directly elected president? I do not think that our country, I personally do not, I will answer it in a different way, because I don't think I can decide if our democracy and people in the grounds are mature. But I don't think directly elected president is good idea generally, because also there can be disagreements. You can have your own opinions in this as well. But I do not generally agree with the idea of directly elected president, especially where populism has fostered so much, especially where people, significant degree of people do not subscribe to mainstream politics as much, in a sense that they do not actively go out and try to follow the campaigns or try to analyze what people would want to say, etc. And all of these factors, and also I think that this gives disproportionately high amount of power to single individual with significantly lesser amount of checks and balances. I think parliamentary system is better for Nepal. And I also think in general for democracy, parliamentary system is better than directly elected system. Another question I have is, what do you think about involvement of youth in Nepali politics? I think Nepali youth can definitely get more involved than they are in Nepali politics, because throughout history, I think movements have been led by the youths of that time. At time when Sherbahadur Dewa fought against Panchayat, he was a very young person. At times when KP Oli fought against the ruling elites of his own region, he still was youth. At times when many other leaders fought or were into politics, they were very young. So young people, the student movement and other things have had significant influence in Nepali politics throughout history. So I think Nepali youth should be engaged more. But secondly, I also think especially the young people of Kathmandu or the elite groups of people are disassociated with politics. And I also think the newer generation specifically, probably generation that I come from and generation that most of us are lesser engaged to politics than the generation before us. And I think that's bad, because I think politics affects us the most, because we're the most young population. The economic policies, the fiscal policies, the political decisions, etc., affects us the most. So I think our involvements should be higher, and our involvement should be more rigid, and our involvement should probably define how politics largely is shaped up. All right. So are you positive towards, so some of the questions are being sent to me privately, so you probably can't see it in the group chat. So I'll also read those questions. Are you positive towards Nepal-India relationship, having seen the foreign policy of India towards Nepal, and also them trying to invade Nepal's sovereignty from time and again? I really don't see why India would want bad relations with Nepal in the present, especially because India is losing a lot of their allies. India is not friends with Sri Lanka. India isn't friends with Bangladesh. India is literal enemies with Pakistan. So India probably would want to have better relations with Nepal too. So I think I I am definitely optimistic in how Nepal-India relationship will be fostered in the days to come, because we've seen decreased amount of India's influence in Nepali internal politics in the past few years. So I think this will continue. And I don't think India would want Nepal to be closer to China too, because then Nepal would be defense for China rather than for India, if that's true. So I think Nepal and India definitely may have better relationship um, in the days to come. All right, if there are any other questions, then I'll take them. So yes, these are the features of Nepali politics. Now, finally, I have one last slide. So how do you argue Nepali politics in a debate? I think this always boils down to these 5 things that I've written. It's always Nepali, because the debates I have seen in Nepal about Nepali politics has always been about either about identity, it's about the degree of democracy, about geostrategy, economic development, and China, India, and US. So while arguing debates, please, you can use the information that I provided throughout the course of these slides in making arguments about identity, in making arguments about democracy. You can try and think about what geostrategy is important to Nepal. But I think always at the very center of it will be democracy and development while you're trying to argue any debate from perspective of Nepal, because I think those 2 things are very crucial to Nepal. So for example, if the debate is about Belt Road Initiative and Nepal's engagement on it, then debate will then boil down to economic development, and probably also about the nature that China has. And if you want to argue from opposition, you probably argue why Nepal needs more of a balanced policy and why Nepal probably needs both China, India, and US, etc. So you probably debate and argue Nepali politics in such way. If there are any other specific questions, I'd be happy to answer. Otherwise, I'm done with the session. All right, so okay, there's one another question. What to expect from citizens in next election? Um, I expect citizens to go out and vote. I think Nepal has usually a high turnout, so I think that's good. I think citizens should vote. I think citizens should vote wisely. I think we should be more politically aware. We should look into, what leaders are saying. We probably should also look into their past record. I think young people specifically should not vote for who their families vote for usually just because they are closer to your families or because your families support them. I think we should vote rationally. So yes, that's what I expect from citizens in next election. So misconception and reality of MCC. I will also attach the file, the agreement of MCC, or the proposed agreement or proposed clauses of MCC at the end, or I'll just send that to Discord server of Smart Club. You can read it by yourself. But I think MCC definitely has been politicized for personal political gains by certain groups of people. And I think that's really the discourses that had happened isn't really the representative of what really MCC is, because at the end of the day, MCC is just a project that will probably help certain infrastructural projects in certain parts of Nepal. They probably help hydropower, they probably help transportation, etc. And if the opposition to it is increased US influence that already exists and that already persists, so I don't think the arguments that says increased US presence has merit to it, because I think that happens regardless. So I think there are many misconceptions, but I would recommend you read it by yourself and come into conclusion by yourself. One final question is that, is Nepal trying to rectify its foreign policy, or does Nepal wants to be heard internationally because Nepal is joining a lot of different international organizations and Nepal is now looking for extended internationalization? I think that's true. I think many countries throughout the world are looking for extended internationalization in the sense that they want more trading partners. They want more allies in their sides. They want more experts coming into their nations to help and solve with and consult with different issues. So I think Nepal is also going in a similar direction. I think this is unique in present because Nepal never had this form of supposed stability, in a sense that we do not have to wonder about systems. We do not have to wonder about political uncertainty in terms of how countries operating, etc. So I think this unique opportunity has given Nepal possibility to extend its relation internationally with different groups of people. So I think definitely Nepal wants to be heard internationally, but I don't think this is Nepal trying to rectify its foreign policy, but Nepal simply trying to extend its relationship with more countries so that it can reap off more benefits out of it. Is breaking the chair in the house legal? I don't know about legality of it. I think someone who's a lawyer can probably define it, but I don't really think it's a good thing to do. I don't think anyone should break chairs while they are debating in a parliament. I think it's really, it shows lack of patience to engage with people. So that's bad, but I'm not sure if it's legal or illegal. It definitely is destruction of public property. So it probably can be termed as illegal, but I don't know about it because I'm not a lawyer. All right. With this, I think we're at the end of the session. I think Smart Debates is doing wonderful in making certain that we are, having more sessions with people who have debated for a long time, and many other young debaters, new debaters can learn out of this. So I think kudos to Smart Club and Smart Debates. Keep doing that. I am looking forward to attend other sessions that are conducted by other people so that I am able to probably learn more from them too. So please invite me. So I have to clarify again that everything that I said, especially non-factual things, are my opinion, and these are personal to me. This opinion have been developed through reading, through my own experiences, and also through what I study as a subject. So if you disagree to it, I think it's great. I think disagreements help. But please do not take these things that I said as objective truth. Try to research by yourself and try to form your own opinions. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for sticking around. I think it was more than it was supposed to be. It was longer than it was supposed to be, but I hope it was worth it. Thank you so much. And all right, I hand this over to the CC.